Okay, so we are good. We're live. Welcome. Hey, I just wanted to welcome the people that might be tuning in, and just thank you all for being here. We just finished up a slideshow that was super fun to watch, and just kind of created a picture, a visual, some of what we got to experience and adventure together over the last, really, we've been together now 20 days, which is pretty incredible. And 15 of those 20 days, we were in the backcountry, just exploring and adventuring in God's creation together, adventuring physically with one another, but then also just going in, metaphorically going into the canyons, so to speak, of our hearts and our soul, and just inviting Jesus to be with us in those places, both personally and then collectively. And it was a really rich and beautiful time. I'm super thankful for Melita. There she is, Melita. It was awesome to lead with Melita. Such a blessing and gift that you are, Melita, and I'm really thankful for this team. And just getting the opportunity to spend 15 days together, 20 days together, was a really rich and meaningful experience for me. And to do it in such a beautiful environment and a beautiful place was really awesome. So I think tonight, my heart is feeling very full and hopeful for what Jesus is just doing in my heart, personally, but then what he's doing, I think, collectively in our hearts because of this trip. And tonight we are going to create space to share that with you all. I know many of you have been thinking of us and praying for us pretty much probably daily since we left here. And so I just want to thank you all as just the community that's been behind us here back in Laramie. Your prayers, your thoughts, your intercession was valuable. And I'm super grateful. And just the support, knowing that there were staff here, just continue to support Strom. I want to thank you all just for continuing the ministry, and all that's happening in my absence in particular has just felt like a real gift. So tonight, we're just going to create space to share. Each person's going to have an opportunity to share whatever they'd like in terms of identifying some of the growth and some of the impact of the trip on their life. We do something at the end of the trip, it's called transference. And the idea is that we're taking what we're beginning to I think we've been processing all trip, but we're taking intentional time to process and reflect on what are some of the things God is or did or is doing in our hearts, in our lives, our soul and our spirit because of the time in the wilderness, because of time in creation. And what are the things that we want to bring from the wilderness back to or transfer into the front country? That is to say, bring with us from the back country into the front country. So there's going to be a chance for you all to hear some of those insights and some of that reflection and some of what God has begun or is continuing to do because of that experience. So I get to start. And I took the leap to be first, and then the rest of the team's gonna have a chance to come after me. So I would say, one, I just wanna say thank you for the prayers and the send-off that you all had for us. I think there were things that were prayed over me in particular that were very meaningful, and I felt like there was really grace from the Holy Spirit to live into those things and just be open to what Jesus had for me in some of the prayers that were prayed over me. And I think some of them were just that I would be able to lean into and experience just, I would say, a childlike joy, a childlike playfulness, a childlike heart or spirit. And really that because of that, there'd be a sense of freedom that comes with just being childlike. That is to say, not childish, but childlike. And so that was a blessing. And then there were prayers really around this idea of abundance, that God had abundance for me, that he's an abundant God, and that I could lean into and step into his abundance and really receive from him this trip. So that was another one. And then just essentially the grace, experiencing the grace of God, God's grace just being poured out on me in a very personal and special way. And so I really felt like I was able to lean into that. So some of these reflections, I think, even connects back to some of those prayers that were prayed over me at the very beginning. So that felt meaningful to me. But For those of you that have been on a Strom course, we do a Devo or a time that we call burdens. So some of you will be familiar with that, like evening group processing time. And I felt like this burden that I was able to like let go or begin to like relate to differently in my life, maybe would be a way to say it, was a real starting point for, I think, a lot of what God wanted to do in my heart and in my life on this trip. So I want to start with my burdens Devo. And sometimes, I mean, I've done the burdens Devo many times. So sometimes it feels really, really meaningful and impactful and very real. And sometimes it's like, I'm not going through the motions, but I'm like trusting that God is going to use this. And I'm doing it out of obedience and trusting that he has something for me, even in the maybe what feels like routine of the Devo. But this time it definitely felt very personal. And that was amazing. That feels really good. So the first thing I want to share that I felt like God is like resurrecting for me, that is to say, like, this maybe was dying or maybe was dead, I don't know, but he's resurrecting this for me. And so that feels really awesome. And I wrote, this is kind of what my burden was, laying down in the shift. The burden, I think, was living from a place where I avoid fears. So living from a place where I avoid fears. And I just was doing a lot of reflection that there's a lot of things in my life where instead I've been living from a place of like avoiding the fear. And the shift now is shifting to a life where I move towards desires. And I was like, okay, that's awesome. I like that. That feels good. So it's like there were things in my life where I consciously was like living from a place of like avoiding fear, and God's like saying, no, stop that, and start moving and shifting to a place where you move towards desires that I placed in your heart. I was like, okay, that feels really good. So I just want to share a few of those that I named that I think were important for me to name. So like, what I've been avoiding, let's say, is the fear of loneliness. And God is saying, no, I want you to move towards the desire I gave you for connection. Instead of living from a place where I avoid the fear of failure, I want to move towards my desire for risk and creativity. Instead of avoiding the fear of rejection, I want to move towards my desire to be seen. Instead of living from a place where I avoid the fear of weakness, I want to shift that to a desire to receive. Instead of living from a place where a fear of incompetence, I want to move towards a desire to be allowed to make more mistakes, and a desire to be known. Instead of a fear of shame, I want it to move towards a desire to be authentic. And instead of a fear of judgment, I want to move towards the desire for grace. And so those were some of the ones that I named that I could see how this was like impacting my life. And I was like, okay, and the thing that felt really hopeful for me is like, it was like had substance to it. And I actually then, even I was talking with Melita at times, like, Melita, I want to like do this right now and avoid this, whatever fear that was, but instead I'm going to move towards this desire. And I was actually like seeing it play out for me on the course, which was really, really cool. And so I think that really, for me, was meaningful because the Lord was just reminding me of some, like this desire he's put in my heart for actually several years now, like quite a few years, where I really want to cultivate like a maturity and a personal discipleship, but then even a discipleship for others that is desires based. And I think sometimes desires in the Bible and in my Christian walk have been like seen of as evil, like, oh, the desires of your heart are evil and bad. And yes, there are carnal desires that God doesn't want me to move towards. But then he's put a lot of desires in my heart that are absolutely from him and totally holy and sacred and reflect the heart of Jesus. And I want to move towards those. And I want to move towards like a maturity and a discipleship that's desires based. And that feels really good. And potentially even like creating like a small opportunity for men to gather, in particular men to gather around like a discipleship and a maturity and a connection experience that's rooted in like the desires that God's placed in our hearts, and how do we move towards those rather than live in fear and reaction. And so I'm like, wow, that feels really good. It also feels really big. But I'm like, I've been avoiding that for a long time out of a lot of fear that I just described. And it's like, no, I think I want to start proactively moving towards that and seeing what people might want to be a part of that and get involved in that at some level. So that felt really cool, and something that feels really life-giving to me right now. So those are some of the things that I think started to come out of this shift for me with my burden of moving towards instead of avoiding fears, moving towards desires. And honestly, I just felt a lot more alive and free. It was like, I feel like more of myself, that is to say, who God's made me to be, my authentic, true self in Christ. And that was awesome. The I am statement that the Lord gave me on this trip, it's connected and similar. The Lord just really spoke to me, this I am statement. An I am statement, for those of you that know, it's like, what is this identity that I sense God is putting in my heart that he's inviting me to move towards? Maybe it's a part of me, but it's not fully formed. Or maybe it's like a part of my identity that I've lost sight of or forgotten. Or maybe it's a part of my identity that I haven't seen really clearly, and he's giving me more and more clarity about that identity. And that those identity statements are rooted in Jesus and what Jesus has done for me, what Jesus has done for us. And so I wrote, I am a beloved son of Abba. I'm a beloved son of Abba. We really talked about like the beloved, like our beloved identity. Like he sees us as beloved and lovely and beautiful and amazing. So I'm a beloved son of Abba, and he's proud of me. I think that was a really big word for me, proud of me, even when I feel weak, inadequate, and insufficient. And so I think I was just really sensing the heart of God, the heart of the Father for me of, he's proud even when I'm not feeling proud of myself. Even when I'm feeling like, what is there to be proud of, that he's proud of me. And it's like willing to receive that. And like, he's proud of me. I'm his beloved child, and he loves me apart from my performance, apart from my sense of strength or what I think I'm great at, even when I'm not feeling those things, when I'm feeling weak, inadequate, and insufficient. And I'm like, yeah, I want to live into that more fully and believe that more fully at like a heart core level, not just mind and intellect. So that's really awesome. And then lastly, I guess I'll share this. Jesus really spoke to me one day during a tag time. It was like a really simple tag time. But I read in John where Jesus just says, I'm the resurrection and the life. It was an I am statement Jesus said. Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. I just started to reflect on things in my life where I felt like they weren't places of resurrection. They were places that felt more dead, or they were dying, or they felt forgotten and like maybe lonely. And I just said, Jesus, like, I really want you to be my resurrection in my life, in those places of my life, in my story, in my heart, who I see myself to be and who I see myself to become. And he just really started ministering to me at a very personal level. Like, I am the resurrection and the life for all of these places that you hold in your heart. And I will bring life. I will bring beauty. I will bring goodness out of those places that you see as maybe dead or dying. Because I put those things in your heart, and they matter to me more than they matter to you. And so I will be your resurrection and life in those places. And I was like, wow, that felt so amazing and so good. Actually, I want to share one other thing. I was also reflecting on my transference from a year ago, literally a year ago, when we had the WMPC party, and I did transference in the field. And I'll be honest, I was looking at some of the things that I had wrote down in my transference from a year ago, and I realized, I'll be honest, I felt some shame and some like disappointment with myself, because it's like, wow, you actually didn't really move towards those things very like in a very conscientious and thoughtful and intentional way. And then I gave myself a little grace. You know, that's always helpful. Not being so hard on myself. And I said, Jesus, what do you want to show me in this? And he actually really started showing me that a lot of why I wasn't able to move towards those things, those are still things that he gave me in my heart. He said, part of the reason you weren't able to move towards those is because you were living from this heart posture or this place of avoiding fear rather than moving towards desire. And I was like, wow, I absolutely see how I didn't move towards those things you showed me a year ago because I was avoiding fear. And now that I have this desire to move towards the things that matter to me and that are placed in my heart because of Jesus, it's like I feel like so free and so, hey, no worries. Hey, it's life. I feel so free and so alive to move towards those. It's like they feel hopeful. Like a year ago, they felt a little more like dread. And now they feel like really life-giving and hopeful. And I'm like, wow, I want to move towards those. And that feels amazing. And so I think it could be summed up with this one, well, probably two of these desires. One, it's time to more freely step into the larger calling that God has on my life to lead people where they have not gone. So that's one of them. And then I can ask for and receive help in the vulnerable parts of my life and heart. And I can move towards those things as well. So those are some of the big ones. But overall, it was a really amazing time. Like I'm feeling really alive, feeling really free, feeling really hopeful for this next season of life that Jesus has me in. And I'm super thankful for you all. So I think that's what I want to share tonight. And Sky, you're up.
Yeah, howdy y'all. I don't have quite that long of a speech to give, but but they said 10 minutes, but he took 10 of mine, so no. But no, I do appreciate all the prayers I'm sure were said for us and as we went out, and it was a wonderful time out there in the wilderness, and I didn't have anything that was really, I don't think, extremely deep or profound that I would have heard from the Lord, but it was a good time. It's always a beautiful time to be in God's creation and see a new place, and very blessed by where we went. Escalante is beautiful, and I had never been in that spot, so that was great. I appreciated that, and also was really blessed to get to spend it with all the people in our group. There's some wonderful people, and it was really great. Tanea, you're awesome, and it was super fun to see you out there and just get to know you a bit. And like I said, if we were half as rad as you, I think the world would be a better place. So yeah, and then Hannah, super great that we had. Yeah, you were part of my lunch mate, and I was always happy to get up and get your coffee water going, because I knew I was gonna get a lunch made for me later. So it was kind of a nice symbiotic trade. Yeah, and then Hope, it was just great to be with you. I'm excited to see what happens in your life with how things go forward, but great to see just how you enjoy being outside and how you work through some tough days as well. So, and Gabe, super sick being out there with you, man. It's cool. Like, there's so many younger people that were in that group. They're all younger than me, but they've all done so many things. You're only 21 and you've done so many cool things. And it's pretty rad to hear. And I'm excited for where the Lord's going to take you. So that was kind of probably my highlight, was just getting to meet you guys and hang out and see what the Lord is doing in your life, and imagine where it's going to go. Because he's good, and he is going to lead you if you let him and follow him. So I'm excited for that. Yeah, and it was a delightful time for me. But yeah, I'll also have some good stories that were good. I'll probably need a little help from my friends. Yeah, one of them I was asked to tell was it was dinner fiasco, and we were so this is on independent student travel, and that's where all the students get sent out like little babes into the wilderness with if you've never had the SROM ration program, basically you're sent out with unlabeled little baggies of either delight or poison, and you're not sure what's what. And so then you work through it, especially on the independent student travel, because our guides are gone now at this point. So me and my kitchen mate, Hannah, are sitting there, and we just had a great dinner, and we were like, that was delicious. and we're most of the way through this trip, and we hadn't dipped into our pudding, and we were like, the other team had been scarfing pudding down. Somehow they had like 18 bags of it, and they'd been eating it like every night. And we're like, we have one bag. We should eat our vanilla pudding. So, of course, we thought we had guides because they had been eating it, and they would recognize it. So we just rummaged around and pull out a little bag of white powder. And we're like, is this it? Is this it? And of course, the three amigos over there are like, oh, yeah, that's pudding for sure. And so, boom, dump it into the bowl, mix it up. And then we divide it. Hannah starts eating hers, and I take a bite of mine and look over at Hannah. Hannah goes, does your pudding taste all right? Is this pudding? I was like, no, this tastes terrible. And so then we were like, well, let's see what the experts say. And I handed my spoon to Gabe, and Gabe took a little tentative lick and said, no, that's not pudding. So everybody tried it, and we couldn't figure out what it was. We're standing there like, and then we're like, well, something's wrong. Maybe it just got hot or whatever it is. So then Hannah and I were like, well, let's fix it. We can fix this. We'll salvage the situation. So we have a lot of like cocoa powder we can mix in. So we started doing that. We're like dipping in with that, a little vanilla, a little cinnamon, mix it up. It's pretty good. Yeah, and Hannah, of course, was like, I'm going to use my Oreos, and I'm going to dip, and I'm going to eat off an Oreo. Fixing it. All right, well, it's horrible. And we're like powering through it, though. And Hannah, she's a trooper. She's always like, every time something's like, she'll be like, oh, it's pretty good. She's over there with that. All right, that's not too bad. Anyway, and Tanea, our problem solver of our group, was sitting there, and she was like working through all the things that could possibly be. And then eventually she goes, guys, it's Alfredo sauce! And it's at that moment, like, the dream died. Like, it was no salvaging the chocolate cinnamon Alfredo into the trash. Yeah. And when she said that, Hannah had an Oreo most of the way in her mouth. There was a small rabbit in front of her that did die from shrapnel from a gluten-free Oreo. She's totally obliterated. So that was a good story. That was a good one. That was a good time. A lot of laughing. So I think that's all I got.
So good.
What's up, guys? My name's Gabe, and I definitely cried so hard laughing. That story, like, I think it's definitely the highlight of my trip for sure. Just seeing him like having to like power through eating that Alfredo sauce, just trying to make it better. But yeah, so I'm just gonna share kind of what the Lord put on my heart through the transference when we were writing down and reflecting everything that we felt and kind of experienced throughout the trip. So yeah, I pulled up to SRAM like borderline burnt out. Just finished a super busy semester, graduated, threw all the stuff out of my apartment, drove out west, and it was just super busy time. And we finally got here, and like I was tired. So one thing I was like really searching for was just like a sense of peace throughout the trip. And I do I think I found that for sure. Like I could pinpoint moments in every single day where I was just like really feeling rested. But it really clicked for me during the solo time when we do like a day on our own. And yeah, it was great because like I just got to spend the whole day reading scripture, thinking, hanging out, skipping rocks. So yeah, it was a really good time, and I think that time, like, I'm the type of person I can hear things and learn things all day long, but it takes a while until it actually clicks. And I think in that time, like, I really got a deeper understanding of what it feels like to rest in the Lord and in His presence.
Wow.
So yeah, and a verse that goes with that was really on my heart was Hebrews 4:11. Where it says like make every effort to enter that rest. So yeah, that was just super nice because it was just such a stark contrast from where I was coming from. It was super valuable for me. And another thing too that I feel like I had learned about a lot but wasn't actually fully clicked was the idea of like spiritual sonship. And I think throughout this time, that's something that I gained a lot more like understanding, not through the brain but through the heart. In that time. And I think like even through that, like starting to read the word in like a new light and deeper understanding because of that sort of shifted perspective. But yeah, and I think throughout this time, God's cultivated a few things in me. One of those, just that idea of sonship being deeper understood, is a stronger relationship with Him and understanding of His love. There are a few tag times I had where whatever verses I was reading, where it was just speaking really, really strongly to me, and really started to feel that in a deeper sense as well. But from that place, I feel like I have a stronger confidence in my ability to like love and lead other people, not like my friends and people I love and family. So that's been sweet to see. And like a ministry I'm a part of back at school is like for fraternities and sororities. So we like lead Bible studies and do events for them and everything. And I think I've been reflecting on that a lot as well. And I think I've grown like a stronger confidence and like a desire to like shepherd and lead my friends back home, which was super cool. And disciple like even younger guys too in that community, which has been awesome to think about. And so you heard Andrew mention the I am statements. The one that was put on my heart that I wanted to like integrate more into my identity was like as a child of God, He delights in me and He is my home. I moved around a lot growing up, so like the idea of home was like a little difficult to grasp sometimes. But going back to that idea of rest, that's kind of like how I connected it. And in our section of like what God desires to build through me, I had like the sense of a home. And then it wasn't until like a couple minutes later I reflected back and was like, oh, like that's what I wrote down through the I am statement. So yeah, and just thinking back about the ministry I'm a part of back at school, like helping to build other guys and fraternities and like their identity as having God as their home, I think would be super sweet. And just to help bring clarity on God's heart for them. How it's not a law and order type of love. I think that was super sweet. And then and to just continue to support that for other people, a confidence in His heart and stronger intimacy with Him. I put like a little box in the middle of like my theme of what I thought the whole trip kind of felt like. And there was a song stuck in my head a few times called New Wine.
I love it.
Yeah, so that one was really speaking to me. And so I put that down as my theme. That's just kind of the ways I felt the Lord working in my heart throughout the time. I'm super thankful for this opportunity too, and grateful to have met everybody and grow in closer relationships. The smaller group was great because like you got to know everybody at a deeper level. At first I was like, less personalities to meet, but the people, you really get to understand them better. I'll be here at SROM throughout the summer. I'm really looking forward to it, and excited to see the ways the Lord will lead me and continue to guide me to grow. So I'm excited.
Woo!
Hi, everyone. I'm Hope. This trip overall, I think was pretty challenging for me personally. But also I think it was also like a blessing at the same time. Yeah, but I guess, yeah, like going into this trip, yeah, I think I was carrying a lot of like heavy things internally. And so, yeah, so that kind of like gave me a lot of anxiety going into this trip because, yeah, I was feeling some pressure too, like wanting to be an instructor for SROM. And so this being kind of like my training for that, yeah, I was just feeling that pressure and then also navigating these things that I was like holding, like I said, internally. So, yeah, and yeah, but one thing I guess when I started, like as soon as we got on the trail, was just feeling this overwhelming sense of, I guess, peace, where my mind just like completely cleared, which is like a very weird experience, but it's also like a really cool thing to experience. Yeah, and so I was feeling that. So, yeah, so like that was cool to experience, but at the same time like hard because I felt like at times that it was hard to like connect with God because I couldn't really think. I was just kind of like very present. And so, yeah, so that was definitely like a little bit of a challenge. But yeah, I think too, I was also kind of like battling this like internal dialogue as I was like doing things and facing different challenges, both like physically, yeah, and then spiritually and mentally. So yeah, so just trying to like navigate that. Yeah, and there were a few days that like we had a lot of like obstacles like that we had to work through on the trail, like the rush and the mosquitoes and the heat and river crossings. And yeah, so it was definitely like pushing me to some places that I was like, whoa, okay, like this is a lot. As well as like hearing this like almost like condescending voice like in my head. So yeah, and then just like stepping into like a position of leadership, we had the opportunity, I personally had the opportunity to lead the group 3 times, which I was pretty nervous about. And yeah, and so yeah, I think like the first couple times it was like pretty hard, like again, just like trying to yeah, like do it well, but also feeling like inadequate in doing it, and stepping into that. But yeah, but at the same time I feel like yeah, like the times that I tried to like connect with God, yeah, I think he was still speaking to me, but like I didn't really realize it at the time. And I kept coming back to Isaiah these times when I was trying to connect with God. And so, yeah, there was this one instance where, yeah, he brought like Isaiah 42 to my mind when I was, yeah, having my tag time. And yeah, and I'll just read it to you guys. But it says, "Thus says God, the Lord, who created the heavens and stretched them out, who spread them out, who spread out the earth and what comes from it, who gives breath to the people on it, the spirit of those who walk in it. I am the Lord. I called you into righteousness. I will take you by the hand and keep you. I will give you a covenant. I will give you as a covenant for my people, a light for the nations, to open the eyes of the blind, to bring out the prisoners from the dungeon, and from the prison those who sit in darkness." And yeah, this verse just like stood out to me, and I was like, wow, like I'm looking at this huge canyon because I'm like sitting under this yeah, overhang, and I'm just looking up at the very blue sky and then the canyon over me, and I was like, wow, like okay, I kind of feel seen by God right now through this verse. And yeah, and so yeah, that was a good moment. Yeah, and then I think kind of like when some things like started to I guess like sort of connect for me was like on my solo time, which I was pretty nervous about because I knew I was going to be alone for 24 hours. and I like being with people. So yeah, so I was like trying to mentally prepare for that. But anyways, yeah, so I get to my spot on solo time, and Melita had actually kind of like suggested some things that we could do like on our solo, like some ways that we could like do something with God. And I get to my spot and I see like these trees that are kind of like curving into each other, and I'm like, oh, that looks cool. It kind of looks like a fort kind of. And then I was like, oh, I should make a tree fort out of this. So so I started like getting sticks, and I'm starting to like build the tree fort. And like growing up, we had like 4 acres of land, and that's literally all I did was I spent time outside and I built tree forts. That was my favorite thing to do. And so anyways, I'm building this tree fort, and I'm like, man, I feel like a little kid again, like, and I just felt like I was really connecting with like the little girl, yeah, from my childhood. And so I'm just like feeling this joy and like remembering that time in my life. And then I like started to think like, oh, I'm feeling like I need a journal or something. So I sit in my fort, and then I'm like journaling, and yeah, I just this like almost like a poem like sort of comes, and I'm like writing, and I'm kind of describing like the time that I just experienced. And then yeah, and then I'm continue writing, but then I'm like also thinking about like another little girl around that same time, and that was not free and was not happy and filled with joy. And yeah, and I began to reflect on that little girl, and that little girl was very insecure and scared, and I'm very anxious. And so I was like, oh wow, okay, and yeah, and then in that moment it was kind of wild. I'm just sitting there, and I look up over to the woods, and I see like Jesus just walking towards me. Wow. And I'm like, oh, okay. And but he's just walking towards me, like nothing happens. He doesn't say anything, but I'm just writing this poem. Yeah, so I didn't really understand like what was going on in that moment. But yeah, and then a little bit later, I'm like, okay, I'm like writing some stuff like, and trying to like pray and like listen. And I'm like, I'm not hearing from God. Like, I'm not hearing anything. And I'm kind of asking questions, too. And anyways, there was this, like, part where I was at where you could, like, climb up to this high point. And so I climbed up there, and I'm like, maybe if I get higher, like, maybe I'll hear from God up there. So I climbed to the top. And, yeah, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like, okay, God, like, I'm here. Like, you know, if you want to say something. And then I'm thinking about Moses, because we talked about Moses when we shared our stories, and I'm like, man, like, why couldn't I see like a burning bush or something, like just something, like, you know, to let me know. And yeah, and then after a little while, as I'm sitting there, again, I kind of like envisioned Jesus just like sitting next to me, and I'm like, oh, okay, but again, like he doesn't say anything, so. Yeah, so it's like, I was just like, okay, I don't really understand, but, yeah, so I think, yeah, after that solo, then kind of like the rest of the trip, yeah, just had some really good times, like really great times, like with, different people, and like, yeah, just exploring the creation and stuff, but still kind of just like wrestling with like feeling just inadequate and, yeah, and insecure about my place, and yeah, not hearing from God, and yeah, and my leadership, stepping into leadership. So yeah, but I think another verse like that God kind of spoke to me later was also in Isaiah, and it's Isaiah 51. And it says, it's Isaiah 51:3, and it says, "For the Lord comforts Zion. He comforts all her waste places. And he makes her wilderness like Eden, her desert like the garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness will be found in her, thanksgiving and the voice of song."
Wow.
So, yeah, as I was kind of like reflecting on just like overall, like what I felt like, yeah, like God was kind of working in my life on this trip. Yeah, I think he was really, through that time on my solo, like speaking just like comfort over me and reminding me of that like little girl that was happy and free, full of joy, and that's like how he sees me and who he wants me to be, and not to be the girl that's insecure and scared, which I often just like lean into more and listen to and act out of. And so, yeah, so again, like the lessons that we learned on the trip, like sonship and our identities in Christ, like, yeah, I was just able to connect that to that moment on my solo. Yeah, and just through these verses in Isaiah, and yeah, I want to like move more towards that. Yeah, after this trip and on into whatever is next. So, yeah. Yeah, so I think that's all.
Hey guys. So I went into this trip like not really knowing what to expect. I hadn't really done like a ton of wilderness time, so I feel like I kind of like skeeted through, like barely making the cut for the trip. But I knew that meant I was going to learn a lot, so I was excited for that. But I think beforehand I had a lot of questions. I was kind of nervous about just like not showering for 2 weeks and just like the little details, and not sure if I was like quite practically prepared enough. But I love like learning new things, and I loved being outside, so I was like, I think it'll be good. And the class beforehand too was really cool. Like the 10-week course we did online, I just felt God like teach me so much through that and like open up my heart in new ways. And it was the first morning we were here, I opened up the Bible and I read the story of Hannah, and then you prayed over me, and you prayed like that God was basically calling me into a like time like when Hannah opened her heart up, not just to God but also to the priest, and actually like let people in on her like her whole story. And I was really bummed because I thought that's what God was doing, and I did not want to do it. Like I didn't want to be open. I didn't want to be open, and I didn't want to be vulnerable because that really didn't sound fun. But when you prayed it, I was like, oh crap. And I even asked Skylar prayed with me afterwards, and he's like, what do you want prayer for? And I was like, oh man, I think I need to be vulnerable. And so that was really, at first I was kind of bummed and scared, but then just getting out there, and like the time where we got to share our stories was really beautiful. And like I loved, it was probably my favorite part was hearing each person's story, and like hearing the story of God's faithfulness in everybody's life, and like how he's led us to this point, and just like really showed us who he is in all different ways. And with that, like I think in my story, letting people in not just on like the cool, fun stuff, but also on like the hard stuff, was cool and new, because I feel like I've processed it with God and with like a few close friends, but it was different letting people in. Like we just kind of met each other, so that was like a new kind of scary experience, but really cool and freeing too. So I'm thankful for that. And I feel like with that, like my I am statement that I came up with was, I am beloved and I am known. Because yeah, it was cool just like working through that with God and seeing like those places of pain where he met me there and like helped me process it and felt the pain with me. So that was really cool. Yeah, and so a verse that I really liked and I felt like was kind of like a theme throughout this trip was Psalms 18, 1 and 2. The first part is like, I love you, Lord. And a couple mornings I woke up just with like the lyrics of that song in my head. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. And that was like a cool gift. Because sometimes I wonder, like, is my faith sincere? Like, are there selfish motives behind it? But I felt like God was really just like showing me like, no, you love me because of who I am. So that was cool. And then it goes on to say like, the Lord is my rock and my fortress and my refuge. And that was like one of my takeaways too, was like, God was with me in those hard times and met me there. And like basically everything in life is going to change. Like I move around a lot, but God's literally the only thing that's going to be consistent. So just like putting my hope there and resting in that was really cool. And similar to one of Gabe's takeaway, one of my takeaways is like that my home is in Christ. And yeah, he's the only unchanging thing. So really just resting in that and having peace. And then with that, I feel like God kind of just gave me permission to like trust him and go for it for like the things that I've been hesitant about. Just like, man, okay, if I'm like doing my best to walk in obedience, that's cool. So I can do those things.
Wow.
And yeah, one thing that was like really special and I feel like God cultivated in me on this trip was during the solo. I just was like, okay, I may as well read the Bible because there like wasn't a lot to do. And so I was reading like just different stories of people in the Bible. So I read Nehemiah, and then I read like Ruth, and I was reading like David's story too, and just seeing like the highs and the lows of his life and how God was with him through all that was really cool.
Wow,
And just
yeah.
like his heart to always go back to God, like whether it's like in times of desperation or times of like great joy. So that was really fun. And just even reading it, I felt like kind of like a kid. My sister and I used to watch Superbook growing up, and like I loved watching that. And when I was reading God's word, I was getting so much joy from it. Like it literally just felt like a kid like watching a show and like fully enjoying it. So it was cool just seeing like it wasn't a booming voice from heaven, but just God meeting me in that like simple way too. It was really fun. And so yeah, so for the little, like the part where it's what is God desiring to build through me, I think joy in the little things, just like seeing all the beautiful flowers in the desert. I wasn't expecting that. I thought it was gonna be like the Sahara with nothing. So that was really cool. And then really just knowing that God like sees and knows me, and so having that same desire to like really see people for who they are and where they're at, and even just creating space to let people be and feel what they need to feel.
Wow.
And then yeah, just kind of like wherever I go to kind of like do my best to cultivate like a culture of seeing people.
Wow.
And yeah, so it was really awesome, and I'm really thankful for this trip, and thank you guys for your prayers throughout it. It was awesome. So
Wow.
thank you guys.
Okay, hi, I'm Tanea. I don't really know where to start, but I guess we'll start at the beginning. I kind of came on this course because I'm planning to work for SRAM this summer, and I was like, oh, I guess this is something we have to do. So, yeah, that's kind of why I ended up on the course, but, like, I was looking forward to, like, spending time in the outdoors, in the wilderness. Like, it's totally where I feel like the most, like, I belong, and this is, like, my home type thing, and I feel like the most connected with God, and I'm, like, I'm so stoked to do that, like, with a group of people, and, like, you guys were, like, the coolest group of people to do that with, so, like, thanks to all you guys. And thanks to Andrew Melita, because you guys were super beneficial in, like, what I learned on this course, especially with, how I felt like God was working in my heart was especially, like, feeling, like, known and cared for, and I felt like the whole team just did, like, a really great job of, like, this was, like, one of the first times I, like, truly understood, like, oh, like, what I, like, who I am and what I've experienced and what I feel, like, actually matters, and it's not something that I just have to deal with by myself and, like, maybe with God, but, like, I don't have to fully internalize it, so that was really, really cool.
Wow.
So thinking about, like, what I felt like God was like drawing out of me, or what he found in me was, like, the main thing I thought of was freedom. Like, the entire trip, something that really stuck out to me was, like, all the flying things. So there was, like, the birds, there was bats, there was all these bugs flying around, sometimes too many bugs flying around, but airplanes in the sky, and every time I saw them, I was just like, wow, like, that is what God wants for me, is that amount of freedom and just soaring.
Wow.
And so, like, I feel like
Wow.
that's kind of something God was drawing out of me, is, like, freedom and joy and delight in him, and, like, just experiencing life to the fullest.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was really, really delightful on this trip, was just, like,
Wow.
finding the playfulness and the freedom and, like, communion with God, and yeah, that was really great. I really enjoyed also kind of, like, you guys talked about the story time, like, that was definitely a highlight for me. Not only just, like, hearing you guys' stories and understanding where you come from and like the inspirations that each of your stories is like truly inspiring. But I felt like my story did not land on deaf ears, and I felt safe and cared for and heard, and like I really liked the feedback. Like people spoke into my life, and like we all had prayer for each other and stuff. And kind of like through that, God was starting to like show me a little bit of like his care for me. Yeah. On my solo specifically, there was one time where I was like, I got on my solo and I was just like doing laundry and like whacking some brush out of the way that was in my way, and I was like, yeah, I'm not really doing anything very spiritual right now, to be honest. I should probably get on that so God's like comes and says hi or something, you know? And I was like walking to do my laundry one time, and all of a sudden I was like, I heard like God in my head, I guess. He's just like, how are you doing? And I was like, why do you care? You know? But I was like, wow, like God genuinely cares about me, even when I don't feel like I'm doing the right thing or like being perfect and stuff. So like it's stuff that I know, but like I don't know. And I feel like it was starting to move its way down, which was really cool.
Wow.
Something that I felt like God was cultivating in me was vulnerability and trust for people to care for my heart, at least a little bit, kind of like I was just saying. Yeah, which requires honesty and trusting people with your inner self. And yeah, this trip gave me a lot of perspective on what vulnerability and trust actually looks like, especially like in a leadership position and in your personal life. Like you need vulnerability in order to like have good relationship and make good decisions. Yeah. So something that I felt like God was trying to show me, like that he's wanting to build through me, was just a testimony of joy, life, and rest found in the surrender to grace. Not trying to do everything on my own and be perfect, but actually like understanding what grace means. I also felt like he was calling me like in this like wilderness, wild space. I had like one day I was just kind of like sitting under a tree reflecting on like the wild places and how it's actually not wild because there's little critters living there and this is like their home, you know? And I was like, wow, like God, I feel like he's calling me to the wild places where oftentimes we look at it and we say like, oh, that's in an uninhabitable place where nobody belongs, you know? But like really there's some people out there living in those spaces that get overlooked. And yeah, I don't know what that exactly looks like specifically, but I feel like God's calling me to the wild places where maybe people have been scared to go for Christ. So yeah, I'm excited to see what God has for me in that, but that's kind of what I feel like I've been drawn to. And a theme word for this trip for me kind of has been the word daughter, which we kind of talked about this at the beginning of the trip with like name meanings and like the impact of that. So my name Tanea actually means daughter. So yeah, it was kind of cool, like that tied into it, and I was like, I'm a daughter of Christ, and like actually standing on that identity and understanding more of what that means. So I also wrote down that I feel like God's calling me to like protect God's value in the sonship and daughterhood inherently placed on every person. So yeah, this trip was like super awesome for me. There was lots of random hard times that just popped up, but like overall, like every experience was growing and super cool experience. So thanks for everyone who was praying and all that.
Hello, my name is Melita. Hi guys, good to be here. I don't love standing up here, but here I am. I'd way rather be like sitting in my crazy creek, you know, chatting with everybody. But transitions are good. Yeah, I think these last 3 weeks, I think just like kind of have blown my mind so much. Before we left here, one of my friends like prayed expansiveness over me. And that's like, I think, a theme right now that like keeps coming up. As well as just like a renewed confidence and as well as grace. Like Tanae mentioned grace so much, and like it's such a, I mean, I guess we hear the word all the time, and like it actually settling in my heart has been quite another thing. And so I'm kind of gonna like touch on those 3 pieces and how feels like God's been interacting with me in this trip. And yeah, kind of just like starting with like this greater confidence. I've like felt more freedom just kind of like settle in where I am. And I think that was really like demonstrated to me on solo, because I like made this decision to like roll up my pants and go through brush, which is just like not a great decision, you know? And the brush was like thick, and I'm exploring new territory. And I'm like, I love exploration, right? But then I'm just like getting scuffed up like crazy. And I just kind of heard Jesus be like, yeah, that was a funny decision or something. It was just like, and normally I'd be like, Melina, what are you thinking? And like my critic would be super loud. And in that space, it was just like, I laughed at myself. I was just like, what the cuss are you thinking, you know? And so like, that was just like a place, I think, of both like confidence and grace, of just like, you can be where you are and make the decisions you are, like, that you make, and it's gonna be fine. Like, and I think like all the time I'm like critiquing myself and being like, well, do it better. Or I like imagine other people are doing the same, right? And then I found this little passage that is titled Finally Free by Richard Rohr, and I just love him so much. But he says, God's goal is always union, which is very different from private perfection. Life lived fully and honestly inevitably involves both joy and suffering, a path of descent, doubt, and lots of little deaths that teach us to let go of our artificially created self and to live in the simple joy of divine union. Wow. And then, kind of at the end of that, he says, we are never perfectly whole, but the acceptance of that lack of wholeness is precisely what we mean by holiness. Wow. And I think like my drive for like perfection and just like to do things right, like isn't the goal, right? But it's what I would prefer. Or it just feels safer. And at Burdens, like that's what I released, or I was wanting to like let that down at a new level of like, hey, I don't need to show up perfectly and I can still be loved, right? Wow. And yeah, and then he just says like, what holiness is like embracing this imperfection in our lives. When we're capable of non-dualistic thinking or contemplation, we can even forgive and accept our imperfections and those of the world around us. I now really wonder if that's not the main point. And then this is the cool one, or the cool line that I'm like, whoa. Divine perfection is precisely the ability to include and forgive all imperfection. And I think that idea of like including and forgiving all imperfection is like the expansiveness that I feel that then just like gives me so much more permission to like step out in imperfection. That gives me confidence as I like embrace grace. Wow. And so, yeah, my I am statement for this trip feels like still really vulnerable to say, which is kind of how I know it's the right one right now. It's just like I am a delight and a favorite of the Father. And yeah, just like feel like God's like really speaking this piece of like being a favorite and being a delight. 'Cause it's really hard for me to believe that, especially when I'm not perfect, or at least my ideal, you know. So yeah, I think there's just like this deeper permission and acceptance even of myself, and then I hope of the world around me. So I think that I'm gonna just like leave it at that little synopsis. Oh, and I think the other thing I'm really proud of this trip is like this entire full page. It was funny. We come back from like our transference chat, and Andrew's like, "Whoa, you wrote something!" And I'm like, "I know, it's amazing. Like, I was literally like celebrating because normally this page is like mostly blank. And I've done this a lot of times, you know? And so it was just like fun, I think, like, it was very fun to be like, okay, I actually have some words. And I don't really know what that shift's about, so I'm curious to like still fill some pages of what that is about. But it was just like really good to settle into a new, maybe just like the more confident space of jotting down something of meaning. So, yeah. So I feel really grateful to be standing here. It was so good to be, in the canyon with you guys, with you, Andrew, and again, we love those spaces. And it was just like a blessing so much to just like journey and be present out there. And also a blessing to come back, which kind of blows my mind to say that because normally I don't really want to come back because I like it out there so much. But yeah, I'm actually becoming more attached to people and so want to be back in the front country so I can check in with how they're doing and let them know where I'm at. So yeah, it feels really good to be back. I feel really grateful too to the summer staff and full-time staff here so that this kind of trip is possible. Just love being here. And I'm curious, Andrew, if you want to share the story that explains the video.
Oh, right.
If you want to.
Briefly.
Yeah.
I forgot about
but thanks,
that.
guys.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I could definitely share that story briefly. You know me, though, I can get a little carried away with the stories.
True.
So if you start to stand up and walk out, that'll be my cue to cut it off. But before that, Jesse, it's too soon. Before that, though, I just want to thank you all for creating space for us to start to process what Jesus is doing in our hearts and did in our hearts and will continue to do outside of our community. We've been together for 20 days, living very intentionally, pretty much around the clock. Basically the only time we're not interacting with each other is when we're sleeping and tag time, which in the scope of a day is a pretty small amount of time. Although some nights, Melita and I would go to bed pretty late because we're like debriefing the day and like wrapping up and discussing how the day went. And then the teams just kind of like stacked up next to each other, like little sardines almost, It's like, wow, they really like each other. That's good. That's precious. And some of them snoring, won't name names, just kind of like filling the canyon with the melodic noise of the chainsaw, so to speak. No, anyway. But to then take that experience and begin to share that outside that community, it is vulnerable. And sometimes we're like trying to process these things in real time. And so thank you for the grace. Just to receive us with open hearts. Be curious about the journey. Want to invite you just to continue to dialogue with us. Because really, honestly, a lot of what happens is emerging. It's an emergent experience. Like we know what happened, we're putting words to it, and then Jesus continues to fill in the experience in the days and the weeks, sometimes months, sometimes years afterwards. Even with my experience, I was thinking with the transference, it's like some of that's now coming around a full circle a year later. So one, for you all, there's grace for that, grace to just experience the process and like continue to invite Jesus into that process. And then for the communities, the people that love us here, the people watching, just continue to gently invite us. Like, tell me more about that. Tell me more about what God was doing in that moment, in that space, because it gives us time to reflect and process back to you. And then honestly, for you to reflect back to us what you heard is just a really important part of how we grow and develop. So want to invite that from you all. And again, super thankful for the experience. And my heart's feeling very full and really, really thankful to Jesus and all of you and this beautiful team and the time that we had together. So I guess I'll close with the story. The video we saw. So that was our final day. That was literally our last day. We're actually like 3 miles from the car at this point. So we're nearing the end. And we're up on the rim now. And we've been hiking in the hot sun for probably a good 2 hours at this point. And no shade, hot sun. Hope and Gabe were our leaders of the day, just crushing it, like doing awesome navigation, like just leading us with excellence, just like we're feeling totally safe, confident, and secure. Like, it was awesome. We get up to the rim, but we're hungry. And they're like, okay, let's get in some shade, let's rest, let's eat some food. So we all gladly just drop our packs, and we're hot and sweaty, and we sit down, and all of a sudden it's just like gnats. Little tiny gnats start swarming us. And so, yeah, kind of like no-see-ums. And that's where Gabe comes up with his outfit of like the glasses and just the hoodie. And then I come up with the bandana, which that video didn't go. I didn't even know Melita was filming, but I had a look, I had a fit, but it was working. Yeah, it was. So Gabe and I are doing great, and we're just enjoying the moment, and there's a lot going back and forth. But I'm getting a little annoyed with all the bugs. So I stand up, and when I stand up, I look over, and like we're around this juniper bush, so it kind of is like wrapping around. And Skylar and Hannah are kind of obscure behind these branches, but they're each holding this giant bag of just stuff. And as I look over, Skylar's squeezing it, and it's like extruding out of the bag. And then he just chomps on it. And I'm like, what is happening? I'm like, what are you guys doing? He's like, oh, this is lunch. Tastes great. I'm like, no way. No way that tastes. But they had made the night before, or was it that morning? Night before. They're quinoa. Oh, they're like, oh, we got tons of food left. Let's not carry it out. Let's eat it. Quinoa, beans and rice. Curry, lots of curry.
Brown.
What? Brown curry. Yeah, it looked very brown in that bag. Yeah. Yeah. Holy cow. And then they're like, well, how are we going to eat it? So they just shoved it in U-line bags and thought, perfect. And it was a great idea. So when it was time to eat it, they just cut the corner off that sucker and just started squeezing. Like frosting. Just started squeezing it. And it was a sight. So I just was like, what is that? So Skylar's like, no, it's great. So then he comes over to demo. That's where the video picks up. Where he just squeezed in this bag. And Melita's like, what do you call that? And I mean, I know this is on live stream. What did you call it, Skylar?
It was the sphincter food dispensing system.
So he says that as I'm taking a drink of water, not expecting him to say that. And I spit it all over the three amigos who are sitting there eating. And they get covered in water / electrolyte mix. And what's that? Element. Yep. Plug for Element. And so it was quite a scene. And then I think Skylar just, why do I keep saying that? I keep calling Skylar Tyler. Skylar then went on and did a shtick about it, and it was hilarious. And we literally, like, were almost peeing our pants in laughter. So that's that story. But I think it highlights the theme of we did have a lot of fun together. We laughed a lot. There was a lot of joy, a lot of laughter, a lot of silliness. And we had a community agreement that one of the things we wanted to live into was what we called goofy balance. That is to say, we wanted to be silly and playful, but we wanted to have balance with, like, sincerity, honesty, vulnerability, and, like, depth. So we hit that a lot. I think we hit that balance really well this trip. And so we had a lot of fun, but we also went to some really deep places with Jesus and one another and in our hearts. And so, yeah, I think I'll close with that. Appreciate you all, love you all. And why don't we collectively, we'll just stand and have a group prayer together as a way to close tonight, all right? All right, blessings. So we'll circle up.
Actually leans over to me in the middle of the slideshow and goes, "You're coming to Uncie's birthday party." That's fun. It's like, that's an April girl. We had that like 3 months ago. And then leans over in the middle of the slideshow.
We got to connect the circle.